Close your eyes for a moment and let the noise of the modern world drift away. Imagine a planet without cities, without cars, without electricity, a planet ruled by quiet, ruled by ice. This is Earth 20,000 years ago during what scientists call the Last Glacial Maximum, the coldest phase of the last ice age. The air is sharp and dry, so cold that it bites your lungs as you breathe. Snow covers vast stretches of the land, and towering walls of ice dominate the horizon. These glaciers are so large that they reshape the world itself, carving valleys, flattening forests, and pushing rivers from their old paths. Sea levels are far lower than today, exposing wide plains where ocean waters will one day return. The planet feels both immense and empty. And yet, in the middle of this frozen silence, there is life. Small groups of human beings huddle together in the shelter of caves, or in tents made from hides and bones. Their fires glow like tiny stars against the endless winter night. Each fire means warmth, food, safety, and survival. Each fire is a fragile victory against a world that seems determined to freeze them out. This is where our story begins, not with kings or empires, not with battles or monuments, but with ordinary people living through extraordinary hardship. The last glacial maximum was not a single event, but a long, slow challenge. For thousands of years, these men, women, and children endured an unrelenting cold. They hunted, they gathered, they moved across the land, and somehow, against all odds, they survived. To understand their journey, we must slow down our own thoughts and enter their world. There are no ticking clocks here, no hum of machines, no city lights in the distance. Night falls with a deep, total darkness, broken only by the pale glow of the moon and the faint shimmer of stars overhead. The silence is so complete that the crackle of a fire sounds like music. The distant cry of a wolf echoes across the frozen plain, reminding everyone of the thin line that separates the hunter from the hunted. Picture a small band of humans gathered near a fire. The flames cast soft light on their faces, tired but determined faces. They have spent the day tracking game, chipping stone tools, and searching for wood or bone to burn. Their hands are rough, their clothes are made of carefully stitched fur, and their stomachs are never quite full. But they are alive, and in this world, that is an achievement worth celebrating. An elder begins to speak, voice low and slow, telling a story that has been told many times before. Perhaps it is the story of a great hunt, or of spirits who live in the ice, or of ancestors who crossed a frozen land long ago. The children listen, eyes wide, the rhythm of the words mixing with the sound of the fire. Stories are not just entertainment here. They are lessons, warnings, maps for survival, and ways to keep hope alive. As we begin this documentary, let us think of those stories. The ones told long ago, in the dark, in the cold, by people who were doing everything they could to see another sunrise. Their voices may be gone, but the traces of their lives remain, in the bones they left behind, in the tools buried in the earth, in the artwork painted on cave walls that still whisper to us across the millennia. This is not a story of quick victories. It is a slow, patient journey through deep time. A story of hardship, of adaptation, and of quiet triumphs. Our ancestors did not conquer the Ice Age in a single moment. They simply endured it, one day after another, until at last the world began to thaw and open its arms once more. So let us walk with them, slowly, step by step. Let us feel the snow beneath our feet, the sting of cold air on our faces, the relief of reaching a fire at the end of a long journey. The world we are about to enter is harsh, but it is also beautiful. A world of endless horizons, glittering ice, and quiet determination. Take a deep breath, let the modern world fade, and prepare to travel back to this distant time. The fire is warm, the night is long, and the story of survival is just beginning. Before the world froze into its deepest chill, life, though challenging, had its balance. The earth was already cooler than today, but it was not yet at its most hostile. Grassy plains stretched wide across Eurasia and Africa, dotted with herds of animals. Forests still lined some valleys. Rivers ran freely, not yet locked under heavy ice. This was the world our ancestors knew before the last glacial maximum took full hold. Imagine standing on a late summer morning. Mist hangs over the grasslands. The sun is pale but warming, and the ground is soft under your feet. In the distance, you see movement, a herd of mammoths grazing, their silhouettes massive against the horizon. Nearby, wild horses and steppe bison move in restless groups, snorting clouds of steam into the cool air. For early humans, this landscape was both generous and demanding. It provided food, water, shelter, but only to those who knew how to find them. Our ancestors lived in small bands, perhaps 20 to 40 individuals, connected by blood, trust, and necessity. They traveled together, following the herds when the seasons changed. This mobility kept them alive, allowing them to find new hunting grounds and avoid exhausting the resources of one place. Life moved to the rhythm of the earth. When spring came, plants grew and animals gathered to graze. This was a time of abundance, of hunting and foraging. Roots were dug from the soil, berries gathered from the bushes, and nuts were cracked open with simple but effective stone tools. Meat from the hunt was shared among everyone. Nothing was wasted. Bones were used for tools, hides for clothing and shelter, and even sinew for sewing and binding. The tools of this era were carefully made. Stone blades were chipped by hand until their edges were sharp enough to slice through hide or meat. Spears were tipped with flint points, allowing hunters to strike from a distance. Fire-hardened wooden shafts gave strength and precision. Fire itself was precious, guarded carefully, kept alive from one campsite to another. If a fire went out, someone might travel for hours to find embers from a neighboring group. Without fire, there was no warmth at night, no cooked food, no safety from predators. Shelter, too, was simple but ingenious. Some groups used caves as temporary homes, their walls still echoing with the smoke stains of ancient fires. Others built huts from mammoth bones, branches, and hides, structures that could withstand wind and snow. Inside these shelters, the air was warmer, filled with the smell of smoke and dried meat. Children played on furs, elders sat and shaped tools, and hunters rested their tired muscles before the next long trek. This was a time when every member of the group had a role. Hunters provided meat. Gatherers brought plants, seeds, and roots. Toolmakers shaped new weapons and repaired old ones. Storytellers and elders kept memory alive, passing on vital knowledge: where to find water, how to track an animal, how to survive a sudden storm. Danger was never far. Wolves and cave lions stalked the same herds that humans hunted. A careless moment could mean injury or death. But our ancestors understood this world deeply. They knew which valleys were safe, which caves were too damp, which rivers would flood, and which plants were poisonous. Survival was not a matter of chance. It was a daily practice, built on patience, memory, and cooperation. This was life before the ice closed in. It was not easy, but it was balanced, a delicate harmony between humans and their environment. But slowly, almost too slowly for any single generation to notice, things began to change. The air grew cooler. Winters stretched longer, biting into the months that once brought plenty. Herds moved farther south, forcing humans to follow. Plants grew scarcer, rivers froze earlier, and some once safe routes became dangerous. For the people living through this change, there were no words for climate shift. There were no records, no charts, no warnings. There was only the quiet realization that each year seemed just a little harder. Perhaps a child would ask why the snows had come so soon, or why the mammoths were fewer this year. Perhaps the elders would tell stories of a time when food was easier to find, when winters were shorter and life less cruel. And yet, they did what humans do best. They adapted. They became more resourceful, more inventive. Their tools improved. Their clothing became better fitted and warmer, stitched with greater care to keep out the wind. Their shelters grew stronger, their fires burned longer. And most importantly, they stayed together. Cooperation was not just a choice, it was survival itself. A lone hunter might catch nothing, but a coordinated group could drive animals into traps or over cliffs. A single family might starve, but a whole camp sharing food could make it through a harsh season. Knowledge was shared, tools were traded, and stories of successful hunts became instructions for the next. This was the world just before the last glacial maximum fully took hold. A world of quiet perseverance and delicate balance. The people of this time did not know that the earth was about to become even colder, that glaciers would soon advance to cover lands they now roamed freely. But whether they knew it or not, they were preparing, strengthening their skills, deepening their bonds, and readying themselves for the long, cold test that lay ahead. The change did not come overnight. There was no single day when the world suddenly froze, no moment when all humans looked up and knew what was happening. Instead, the earth shifted slowly, almost gently at first. Each year brought slightly longer winters, slightly shorter summers. The winds grew sharper, the air drier. Rivers that once ran freely now froze solid earlier in the season. Forests that once gave shelter and wood for fire began to thin. Imagine walking with one of these small human groups across a wide plain. Perhaps it is autumn, a time when food is usually gathered in preparation for the cold months. But this year the herds are smaller. The plants that once grew along the riverbank are gone, leaving only frost and hard soil. Snow falls sooner than expected, and the wind bites through even the thickest firs. The elders exchange worried looks, but there is little they can do except keep moving. Over many generations the world continued to grow colder. Ice sheets, vast gleaming walls of frozen water, spread slowly outward from the poles. They advanced mile by mile, year by year, carving through the land like patient, unstoppable giants. In North America, glaciers stretched over what is now Canada and the northern United States, burying entire valleys and mountains under ice more than a mile thick. In Europe and Asia, ice spread across the north, locking the land in silence. This was the last glacial maximum, the peak of the Ice Age. The world's temperature dropped by several degrees, enough to transform landscapes, push species to extinction, and force humans into smaller and smaller pockets of habitable land. Sea levels fell by over 100 meters, exposing coastal plains and connecting continents that are now separated by oceans. Asia and North America became linked by a wide stretch of land, a land bridge that we now call Beringia, allowing animals and humans to migrate between the continents. But these changes came at a price. Much of the world turned into cold, dry steppe. Rainfall decreased, leaving many regions almost desert-like despite the ice nearby. Food became scarce. Animals that had once been easy to hunt moved farther away or died out altogether. For humans, survival became a constant test, a puzzle with no room for mistakes. Picture the world at this moment. The air is still, the ground hard with frost. Far away, the ice glints under a pale sun, stretching toward the horizon like a frozen ocean. The wind howls through empty valleys, carrying fine, powdery snow that never seems to melt. The silence is heavy, broken only by the distant creak and groan of the ice sheets moving slowly, endlessly, reshaping the land beneath them. This was a world of extremes. Summers were short and cool, barely long enough to grow plants or gather food. Winters were long, dark, and merciless. In many places the ground never thawed completely. Permafrost locked water and nutrients deep underground, making farming, something humans had not yet fully mastered, impossible. Every day was a struggle to find enough calories to stay alive. And yet, there was a strange, stark beauty in this frozen planet. At night, the stars shone brighter than we can see today, glittering across a sky unspoiled by smoke or light. The moon cast silver light on the snow, making the landscape glow with an eerie, calm brilliance. Fires flickered in the darkness like beacons of life, small but defiant against the endless cold. For our ancestors, this was not just a climate event, it was life itself. Children were born into this frozen world, knowing no other. They grew up learning how to read animal tracks in the snow, how to find edible roots buried under frost, how to chip stone into sharp blades even with numbed fingers. Their very first memories may have been of the sound of wind outside a shelter, or the warmth of a fire after a long day in the cold. The cold shaped not just their environment but their minds. It made them cautious, observant, patient. They learned to move with the seasons, to follow the great herds of mammoth, reindeer, and bison as they migrated. They learned to store food, to dry meat, to preserve fat, because a mistake in planning could mean hunger or death. But perhaps most importantly, the cold forced them to stay close to one another. Solitude was dangerous in such a world. The warmth of a group, both physical and emotional, could mean the difference between survival and freezing to death. When the nights grew longest, people gathered together, sharing warmth, food, and stories, reminding each other that they were not alone in the dark. It is in this setting, this frozen, breathless world, that humanity faced its greatest challenge. The last glacial maximum was the ultimate test of endurance, and it would push human ingenuity, creativity, and cooperation to the very limit. And yet, as we move into the next chapter, we will see that humanity did not simply endure this time. They adapted, they innovated, and they found ways to turn the odds in their favor. Even as the world grew colder, humans grew wiser, learning to shape their tools, their shelters, and their lives to fit this new, icy reality. The world of the last glacial maximum was a world designed to test every living thing. It was not just cold, it was relentless. It was a place where survival was never guaranteed, where the smallest mistake could mean the end of a life or even an entire group. Imagine waking up inside a small shelter as dawn begins to lighten the frozen sky. The air inside is sharp and dry. The fire from the night has burned down to glowing embers, and the cold has crept in during the dark hours, settling into every surface. Your breath rises in soft clouds, and frost clings to the inside of the walls like tiny crystals. The first task of the day is not to hunt or to gather. It is simply to coax life back into the fire before the bitter chill claims the shelter. Outside, the world is silent. Snow lies thick across the ground, and the wind cuts across the open plain. In many places, the temperature stays well below freezing, sometimes dropping to levels that modern humans would find unbearable. There are no warm houses to retreat to, no stocked pantries waiting with food. Every calorie must be earned through sweat and effort. The cold was constant and it did not forgive weakness. Frostbite could claim fingers or toes in hours if clothing was torn or damp. Hypothermia lurked as a constant threat, especially if someone fell into icy water or was caught unprepared in a storm. The wind carried a particular danger. It could strip away body heat faster than still air, and it made even short journeys exhausting. But hunger was perhaps the most powerful danger of all. Animals that once grazed in abundance were fewer and harder to find. Each hunt was a gamble, long days of tracking, risking injury in the chase, hoping that the prey would fall before the hunters did. A single successful mammoth hunt could feed a group for weeks, but a string of failures could mean slow starvation. Every scrap of food mattered. Every bone, every bit of fat, every edible plant or root was saved and shared. Gathering was no easier. The ground was frozen for much of the year, and many plants lay dormant under snow or ice. Women and children might spend hours digging through frost, searching for hidden tubers or scraping lichen from rocks. Nothing came easily and nothing came without effort. Predators were another danger that never slept. Wolves moved like shadows across the white expanse, their howls echoing through the night. Cave lions, larger than the lions we know today, prowled near the edges of human camps. Even giant hyenas and saber-toothed cats roamed in some regions, ready to take down the weak or scavenge a poorly guarded kill. Every kill made by humans was a signal fire to the wild, a smell that drifted across the wind, calling predators closer. At night, guards might stay awake to keep the fire blazing, their ears tuned to the distant crunch of snow that might signal danger. Shelter itself was a daily challenge. A storm could bury a camp in snow or rip apart a hide tent with fierce winds. Even caves, though safer, were not always perfect refuges. Some were occupied by bears or wolves. Others were so damp and cold that staying inside too long meant sickness. People learned to build quickly, to pack snow and ice into walls to block the wind, to patch roofs with hides and furs until they were strong enough to hold. And when someone was injured or ill, the challenge grew even greater. There were no medicines beyond what could be gathered from plants, no doctors beyond the wisdom of the group's elders. A broken leg could leave a person helpless, and the group would have to decide whether to slow their migration to care for them or to keep moving to survive. It was a harsh calculus, and yet many groups did choose to stay and help, because they knew that every life, every pair of hands, was precious to the survival of the whole. This harsh environment did more than test the body, it weighed heavily on the mind. The endless horizon of white snow, the long, sunless winters, the constant howl of the wind, these could press upon the spirit. Some nights stretched so long that it seemed morning might never come. The stars overhead were bright and cold, and the world could feel frighteningly empty. And yet humans did not give up. Even in this unforgiving landscape they found ways to endure. They learned to use the ice and snow to their advantage, digging shelters into snowbanks to stay warm, using frozen rivers as pathways to travel more easily. They hunted smarter, driving animals toward traps or natural barriers. They shared resources, ensuring that no one starved if there was anything left to eat. The environment was harsh, yes, but it also shaped the people who lived in it. It taught them to be careful, observant, patient. It taught them to prepare for tomorrow even while struggling through today. And it taught them the value of community, because one person alone could not survive this world for long, but together there was a chance. Despite the danger, there was a kind of beauty here. The snow glittered under the moonlight, the aurora danced across the sky like silent green flames, and the ice itself glowed blue in the midday sun. The world was dangerous, but it was also magnificent. A vast, still stage upon which the drama of survival was played out. And so, each day humans rose to meet this world. They faced its dangers with courage and skill, they fought hunger with creativity, they fought the cold with fire and fur, and they fought despair with stories, songs, and rituals that kept the spirit of hope alive. This was the crucible in which humanity was tested. And out of this crucible came strength, the kind of strength that would carry humans through to the next age, the next challenge, the next sunrise. Now, with the dangers laid bare, we can turn to the quiet victories. The tools, the shelters, the clever techniques that allowed humans not just to survive in this frozen world, but to begin, slowly, to master it. In a world where the wind could freeze exposed skin in minutes and food was never guaranteed, mere strength was not enough to survive. Humans were not the fastest animals on the steppe, nor the strongest, nor the most physically fearsome. But they had something no other creature had: the ability to imagine, to plan ahead, and to shape their surroundings with purpose. Tools were humanity's quiet superpower, simple objects turned into lifelines, transforming a hostile, frozen world into a place where survival was possible. Picture a small camp at twilight. The hunters are seated near the fire, carefully shaping stones into tools. Each strike of flint on flint produces a sharp clink that echoes into the cold air. Tiny flakes of stone fall to the ground, forming a halo of debris around the napper. Slowly, a perfect edge takes shape, a blade sharper than anything in nature. These were not random creations. Every curve, every edge, every notch was intentional, the result of centuries of knowledge passed down from one generation to the next. Stone blades were fitted into wooden or bone handles, tied securely with strips of sinew. Some became knives for cutting meat or scraping hides. Others became spear points, designed to pierce the thick hide of a mammoth or bison. As time passed, humans learned to make smaller, more precise tools. Microliths that could be combined to create arrows and harpoons, turning hunters into more efficient and safer predators. But hunting weapons were only one part of the story. Another invention, small, delicate, and almost humble, may have saved more lives than any spear: the needle. Fashioned from bone or ivory, these slender tools allowed humans to stitch hides together into fitted clothing that kept the cold at bay. Layered garments, boots lined with fur, hoods that covered the head and neck, all became essential in a world where exposed skin could mean frostbite. Shelters grew more sophisticated too. When caves were not available, humans built their own homes. In some places, they created impressive structures from mammoth bones, using tusks as supports and ribs as frames, then covering the whole structure with hides. Inside, a hearth was built at the center, and the heat would rise to warm the enclosed space, turning a frozen night into something bearable. Fire itself was one of humanity's most treasured tools. It was not just warmth, it was life. Without fire, meat could not be cooked, water could not be thawed, predators could not be kept at a safe distance. At first, fire was something to be preserved, coals carried carefully from one camp to the next. But eventually, humans learned to create it on demand, striking flint against iron pyrite to make sparks or using dry fibers and friction to coax a tiny ember to life. That small flame, when fed, became the heart of the camp, a source of safety and community. Hunting strategies also evolved. Instead of relying on luck or brute strength, humans began to think like their prey. They studied animal migration routes, learned which valleys funneled herds into narrow spaces, and worked together to drive animals toward traps or ambush points. Some groups built drive lanes, lines of stones or branches that guided animals toward a waiting group of hunters. Others used spear throwers or atlatls, devices that acted as levers to hurl spears with far more force and range than a human arm alone could manage. Even food storage became a technology. Fresh kills were cut into strips and dried over the fire, turning them into long-lasting jerky. Fat was melted down and stored, sometimes mixed with powdered meat or berries to make high-energy foods that could be carried on long hunts. In colder regions, the ground itself became a tool. Pits were dug into the permafrost, acting as natural refrigerators where meat could stay fresh for months. Water, too, required ingenuity. Snow could be melted, but that consumed precious firewood. Finding natural springs or ice that was safe to drink from was a matter of knowledge passed down from elders. Sometimes water was carried in animal bladders, frozen into blocks for later use, a primitive but effective way of storing life itself. But the tools of survival were not only physical. They were also intellectual. Language grew richer, allowing detailed instructions to be shared: how to build a trap, how to find a safe crossing on a frozen river, how to chip a stone just so to get the sharpest edge. Stories became tools too, not just entertainment but memory and education. A tale of a dangerous hunt could serve as a warning for generations to come. And then there was art. At first glance, the paintings deep inside caves, of bison, mammoths, and reindeer, might seem like luxuries unnecessary in such a difficult world. But perhaps they were much more. They may have been lessons for young hunters or rituals meant to call good fortune, or simply a way of saying, "We were here. We saw this. We lived." Even beads, carvings, and pendants found from this era suggest that humans sought beauty and meaning even as they fought to survive. Through these tools, sharp stone blades, warm stitched clothing, strong shelters, controlled fire, humans transformed from fragile creatures into adaptable survivors. Each invention was a quiet victory against the cold, a small but powerful act of defiance. Imagine sitting by the fire as night falls. Around you, tools are carefully placed, weapons repaired, clothing patched. Children watch, learning by imitation, their small hands practicing with stones and bones. Here, in this quiet moment, you can see the ingenuity that would carry humanity forward. not just to the end of the Ice Age but eventually to farms, villages, cities, and civilizations. These tools were more than objects. They were hope, they were memory, they were the bridge between one harsh winter and the next. And with every tool made, every shelter built, every fire sparked into life, humans were writing the first chapters of the story of ingenuity, a story still being written today. The morning begins in darkness, because the sun rises late in this frozen world. The shelter is silent except for the soft crackle of the dying embers in the fire pit. Frost glitters faintly on the walls, turning every surface into something delicate and white. A single figure stirs, pulling a fur cloak tighter before crawling to the center of the shelter. Carefully, patiently, they add a few sticks to the coals, blowing gently until the embers glow bright red and the first small flames appear. Slowly, the fire grows, sending thin columns of smoke upward, filling the space with warmth that is subtle at first but enough to wake the others. Outside, the land lies still under a pale sky. The air is sharp, the kind of cold that makes every breath sting. Snow crunches softly as the hunters step out of the shelter one by one, their fur-lined boots leaving deep tracks behind them. The wind brushes across the plain, carrying with it the distant sounds of a world just beginning to stir, the faint call of a bird, the groan of ice shifting somewhere far away. The hunters scan the snow for tracks, looking for any sign of passing herds during the night. If they are lucky, they will find fresh footprints of reindeer, bison, or perhaps even mammoth. Back inside the shelter, breakfast is being prepared. Dried meat is warmed near the fire, and a thin broth, made from the bones of the last hunt, simmers slowly in a clay pot. Everyone eats quietly, saving their energy for the work ahead. Food is shared equally because survival depends on fairness. Everyone must have the strength to do their part. When the meal is finished, the hunters gather their spears, stone knives, and atlatls, the spear throwers that give them greater reach and power, and they set off across the frozen plain. Those who remain in camp begin their own work. Snow is melted to make drinking water, which requires keeping the fire alive and fed with precious wood. Tools are repaired. Flint blades are sharpened, broken spear shafts are replaced, and hide garments are patched with sinew and bone needles. Children help in small ways, gathering sticks for the fire or practicing with small stones, copying the motions of the toolmakers. Each small act is a lesson. Every day is training for the future. The hunters move slowly, careful not to tire themselves too soon. Tracking is a skill that takes patience. They kneel to examine prints, touch the snow to feel how fresh the tracks might be, listen for faint sounds in the distance. Sometimes they follow a trail for hours before catching a glimpse of their prey. When they find the animals, they work together silently, positioning themselves to block escape routes, waiting for just the right moment to strike. A successful hunt means survival not just for today but for many days to come. A failed hunt means hunger, and hunger means weakness. If the hunt is successful, the meat must be carried back to camp quickly before scavengers arrive. The group works together to butcher the animal, cutting it into manageable pieces. Fat is saved and rendered into tallow, hides are stripped and set aside to dry, bones are broken open to reach the marrow. Nothing is wasted. Even the tendons are saved to make cordage and thread, even the skull may be carried back for ritual or for use as a tool. This is the rhythm of survival. Every part of the animal has a purpose. As evening approaches, the camp fills with activity. Fires are stoked higher, the smell of roasting meat fills the air, and the group gathers close to share the meal. There is relief here and even joy. For one more night at least they will go to sleep with full stomachs. The warmth of the fire glows against their faces as they sit in a circle, passing pieces of food, speaking in low, tired voices about the day's work. The children eat first, then curl up on the furs to rest, lulled by the sound of crackling firewood. After the meal, someone begins to tell a story. The voice is slow, steady, and soothing. Perhaps it is a story of a great hunt from long ago, or of the spirits that guide the herds, or of the ancestors who faced winters even harder than this one. The flickering firelight throws shadows on the walls, and the listeners fall quiet. Stories are not only entertainment here, they are lessons, reminders of the wisdom of those who came before. Outside the shelter, the night deepens. The stars blaze in the sky, brilliant and cold. The northern lights ripple silently above, painting the heavens with waves of green and violet light. The plain is silent except for the occasional cry of a distant wolf or the groaning of ice shifting under its own weight. Inside, the fire burns steadily, casting a protective glow over the camp. One by one, the people drift to sleep, huddling close together under heavy furs. The warmth of their shared body heat and the comfort of the fire make the cold bearable. Someone stays awake to tend the flames, feeding them when they grow too low, because letting the fire die could mean waking to a shelter filled with deadly cold. And so the day ends much as it began, with the fire still burning, with the group still alive, with the promise of another dawn ahead. This rhythm repeats, day after day, season after season, an endless cycle of work and rest, danger and relief, hunger and plenty. Each day survived is a small triumph, a quiet victory in the face of a world that seems determined to erase them. And with every sunrise they grow more skilled, more prepared, and more connected, slowly shaping a future where survival is not just possible but certain. In the deep cold of the Ice Age, survival was never a solitary task. A lone person wandering the tundra could not hope to last long against hunger, predators, or the unrelenting chill. It was togetherness that made survival possible, the strength of many hands working as one, the comfort of many voices keeping fear at bay. In those frozen centuries, the most powerful tool humans possessed was not made of stone or bone, it was the community itself. Picture a small band of 30 or 40 people, traveling together across a snow-swept plain. Each step they take presses deep into the crusted snow, leaving a winding trail that marks their passing. They move as one, slow but steady, because they know that falling behind is dangerous. Children are bundled in furs, carried when the journey becomes too harsh. The strongest members lead the way, breaking the path through drifts, while others watch the horizon for threats. Every person has a role, every person matters. When they make camp for the night, it is not just a place to sleep, it becomes a small village, a circle of warmth and life carved out of the cold. Fires are lit, shelters are raised, meat from the last hunt is cooked and shared. No one eats alone. Food is divided carefully so that each person has enough to keep their strength. If a hunt was poor and the food scarce, everyone shares the hunger too. This fairness is the glue that holds them together. To hoard would be to break trust, and in a world like this, trust is everything. Around the fire, the group becomes more than a collection of individuals. They are a living network of memory and skill. The hunters speak of the tracks they saw that day, planning where to search tomorrow. The toolmakers inspect weapons, repairing what was broken, sharpening what grew dull. Someone sits quietly mending a cloak, the needle flashing in the firelight. Children gather close, learning by watching, absorbing the rhythm of life in the camp. The elders are the keepers of memory. They cannot run as fast or lift as much, but their knowledge is a treasure that cannot be lost. They tell stories of where the rivers are deepest, where the ice is thin, where the herds cross each year. Their memories stretch back decades, and in those memories lie the difference between finding food and wandering hungry in the wrong direction. At night, their voices fill the camp with slow, measured words, passing lessons from the past to those who will face the future. Danger strengthens these bonds. If a predator appears near camp, the group rises together, spears raised, fires made bright. A lone wolf might be fearless, but a pack of humans shouting and brandishing weapons is something even a predator must respect. When someone is hurt, the group slows its pace to help them, even when it means risking their own safety. They splint broken bones, keep the sick warm, share the softest furs with the weakest. This is not only compassion, it is survival strategy. Each life is valuable. Every pair of hands, no matter how small, can one day help keep the fire burning or carry meat back from a hunt. The emotional power of community cannot be overstated. In the long, dark nights when the wind screams outside and the shelter creaks under the weight of snow, fear could easily creep in. But with others near, with the sound of breathing, the crackle of fire, the occasional quiet song, that fear softens. Laughter still finds a place even in such a world. A shared joke, a playful tease, a story that makes the children giggle. These moments keep despair from taking hold. The rituals of the camp are a form of comfort too. When a baby is born, everyone celebrates softly, knowing that this tiny child is hope made flesh, a sign that life will go on. The baby is wrapped carefully in fur and passed from arm to arm, each person welcoming it into the world. When someone dies, the mood is heavy, but even then there is care. The body is laid to rest with tools, beads, or offerings as if to guide them safely into whatever world lies beyond. These ceremonies remind the living that they are part of a greater story, that their lives have meaning even in the vast emptiness of the tundra. Night after night, the fire becomes the heart of this small society. Its glow draws everyone inward, its warmth allows conversation to stretch into the late hours. Songs may be sung low and steady, the voices blending into a kind of lullaby for the whole camp. Sometimes a story of bravery is told, a great hunt, a narrow escape, a clever trick played on an animal spirit, and in those moments the listeners feel that they are not just surviving but participating in something timeless. Cooperation was not simply a matter of sharing work, it was a way of multiplying strength. One hunter alone could not take down a mammoth, but 10 hunters working in harmony could. One person alone could not watch for danger every moment of the night, but with many the watch could be shared. Together they could move mountains, or at least carve a living out of a frozen one. Small acts of kindness kept the fabric of the group strong. A mother might share her portion of food with a neighbor's child who was weaker. A hunter might give away his warmest fur to someone injured and unable to leave the shelter. Someone might sit awake through the cold hours just to keep the fire burning so the others could sleep. These quiet sacrifices were never forgotten, and they deepened the trust that held the group together. And so, even as the ice seemed endless and the winters unbroken, humanity endured. Not because they were stronger than the cold or faster than their prey, but because they had one another. Together they built not only fires but traditions, not only shelters but a sense of belonging, not only strategies but stories that gave meaning to their lives. It was this strength of connection that carried them forward, that kept them walking when their legs ached, kept them hunting when their stomachs were empty, kept them laughing even when the night was long. The power of community was the quiet, unbreakable thread that tied them to the future. And as we look back across 20,000 years, through the ice and the darkness, it is this image we see most clearly. A circle of people gathered close around a fire, sharing warmth, sharing food, sharing life itself, together holding back the cold night. Far from being only hunters and gatherers, the people of the Ice Age were also dreamers, thinkers, and storytellers. In the long nights when the wind howled outside and the world was buried under snow, they turned inward, not only to their shelters but to the deeper questions of life. Around the fire they asked where the animals came from, why the seasons changed, what happened when someone died. In a world filled with danger, mystery, and beauty, they began to seek meaning. Deep inside caves, far from the cold outside air, humans painted. The walls of these caves still speak to us across thousands of years. Shapes of bison, horses, mammoths, and reindeer stretch across the stone, drawn with red ochre, black charcoal, and yellow earth pigments. The animals seem to move in the flickering light of a torch as if alive again. Some are pierced with arrows or spears, perhaps as a wish for success in the hunt, a kind of early prayer. Others are shown leaping, running, breathing, as if to honor their spirits. Imagine entering such a cave. The floor is cold beneath your feet, and the air smells of smoke from torches. The light dances across the walls, revealing shapes and colors in shifting patterns. Someone kneels near the wall, carefully applying pigment with a brush made from animal hair or even blowing it through a hollow bone to create a soft spray. The act is slow, deliberate, almost sacred. Around them, the others watch in silence. They are not just making pictures, they are touching something beyond the ordinary. Rituals too were part of daily life. Perhaps before a hunt, the group gathered to perform a simple ceremony, painting the spear points with ochre, chanting softly, asking the spirits of the animals for permission or forgiveness. Perhaps after a successful hunt, they gave thanks, leaving offerings of fat or bones to ensure that the herds would return next season. These practices created a rhythm, a way of connecting to the world that made life feel less random and more guided. The dead were not simply abandoned to the snow. Many burials from this time show care and intention. Bodies were laid in the ground with tools, beads, or weapons, as though they would need them on a journey beyond life. Sometimes red ochre was sprinkled over the body, a sign of respect or renewal. These burials tell us that humans believed there was something after death, something more than the hard days of earth. This belief must have given comfort, making loss bearable in a world where death was never far away. Even simple objects carried meaning. Small figurines carved from bone or ivory have been found. Some of animals, some of human figures, some mysterious and abstract. They may have been charms, perhaps carried for luck or protection. Beads were strung into necklaces or sewn into clothing, not only to decorate but perhaps to mark status, celebrate a successful hunt, or keep the memory of a loved one close. At night, as the fire crackled and shadows danced on the shelter walls, stories were told that mixed memory and imagination. These stories may have explained why the mammoths roamed, why the ice moved, why the stars shone so brightly. Myths were born in this time, shaped by the snow and the sky and the challenges of survival. The children listened with wide eyes, learning not only practical wisdom but also the idea that they were part of a world filled with forces larger than themselves. There was beauty even in hardship, and humans found ways to express it. The music of a flute carved from a bird's hollow bone might echo through a cave, soft and haunting. Simple drums made from stretched hide might be beaten in rhythm, their sound mingling with voices and song. These sounds, combined with firelight and movement, could transform an ordinary night into something magical, something that lifted everyone's spirits and reminded them that life was more than just the struggle to eat and stay warm. This early spirituality was not separate from survival, it was woven into it. By telling stories, singing songs, and making art, humans created hope. Hope that the hunt would succeed, that the sun would return after winter, that the dead were not gone forever. These beliefs gave them strength to wake each morning and face the cold once more. They reminded everyone that they were part of a bigger story, one that stretched beyond their own lives. And so, even as the glaciers loomed and the winters deepened, there was color, music, and meaning in the Ice Age world. There was beauty painted on cave walls, there was reverence in the way bones were buried, there was quiet joy in the way people gathered to sing. These acts were as essential as fire and food, because they kept the spirit alive. When we look at these paintings today, we are looking not just at art but at a message sent across time. We were here. We saw the world. We struggled, but we also dreamed. And even in the coldest age, we found a way to make life beautiful. The change came slowly, so slowly that no single generation could truly see it. But over many lifetimes, the air grew a little softer, the winters a little shorter, and the ice that had seemed eternal began to retreat. At first it was barely noticeable, a longer spring here, a river thawing earlier there. Yet these small shifts added up to something extraordinary. The world was waking up from its long, frozen sleep. Imagine standing on a plain that for centuries had been buried in snow and ice. Now, patches of grass are beginning to show through, green against the melting white. A trickle of water runs where there was once only hard-packed snow. The sound of running water, silent for so long, is like music. Birds return to the sky, their calls breaking the heavy silence of winter. Slowly the earth begins to breathe again. The glaciers, once vast and unmoving, start to shrink. The great ice sheets that had stretched across continents melt back inch by inch, then mile by mile. Rivers swell with meltwater, carving new paths through the land. Lakes form where ice once lay heavy. The sea, which had been lower for thousands of years, begins to rise again, slowly swallowing the wide plains that once connected continents. The world is being reshaped in front of human eyes. New rivers, new coastlines, new hunting grounds. For the people who had endured the harshest centuries, this change must have been both relief and challenge. With warming came more plants, more animals, more food, but it also meant new movements, new migrations, new dangers. The herds shifted their routes to follow fresh grasslands, and humans followed them. Camps that had been used for generations were abandoned as groups set out to explore newly opened valleys and plains. Each journey was filled with discovery. A river that had once been frozen solid could now be crossed by raft or swum across in summer. Forests began to creep back over the land, offering shelter and firewood. The tundra, once endless and barren, became dotted with flowers and buzzing with insects. For the first time in many generations, children could run barefoot on soft ground, and the smell of wet soil filled the air. But the thaw also brought challenges. As the ice melted, floods swept through valleys, cutting off old paths and drowning low-lying camps. Rising seas consumed the land bridges that had once connected distant regions. Entire hunting grounds vanished underwater. Groups were forced to move quickly to higher ground or seek new territories altogether. The earth was no longer a static, frozen stage, it was a shifting, changing landscape, demanding that humans adapt once again. With more food available, populations slowly grew. Camps became larger and some groups stayed longer in one place. This stability allowed for new ideas to flourish, better shelters, more elaborate tools, and eventually the earliest steps toward farming. The old ways of life were not left behind overnight, but the seeds of a new kind of living had been planted. In this period of change, humans may have felt something they had not felt for centuries: hope. For so long, the cold had pressed down on every thought, every plan, every dream. Now, with the warmth returning, there was space for new possibilities. The hunt was still difficult, but it no longer felt like a desperate gamble. Food could be stored with greater confidence, and the risk of starving through winter was lessened. Even the nights felt different. The stars were the same, the fire still crackled, but the air no longer cut so sharply. There was a sense that the worst was finally passing. Elders might tell stories of the great ice that once stretched as far as the eye could see, shaking their heads at how much the world had changed. Children listening to those stories might have trouble imagining such endless cold, for their own lives were filled with more greenery, more animals, and more light. Yet the memory of the Ice Age never fully left them. It remained in their stories, their rituals, their respect for the fire and for the animals that gave them life. The skills learned during the harshest winters, tool-making, cooperation, patience, became the foundation on which new ways of living were built. The long trial of the last glacial maximum had shaped humanity, forging a resilience that would carry them into the next era. As the ice withdrew farther and farther, entire regions became habitable for the first time in thousands of years. Humans moved into Europe's northern reaches, across Asia's open plains and deeper into the Americas. They were no longer simply surviving, they were expanding, exploring, thriving. The retreat of the ice was not just the end of an age, it was the beginning of a new chapter in the human story. The Earth was no longer the same planet it had been at the height of the cold. Rivers had been rerouted, coastlines redrawn, valleys carved deeper by the weight of the glaciers. But humanity had changed too. These were no longer the same people who had faced the first freezing winds thousands of years earlier. They were stronger, more skilled, and more adaptable than ever before. And so, as the world warmed, humans stepped forward into it, still cautious, still clever, but carrying with them the lessons of the ice. They had endured hunger and darkness, faced predators and storms, and yet they were still here, ready to begin again in a world that was at last beginning to welcome them. The long winter is ending now, but its story still lingers. The people who lived through the last glacial maximum did not just endure a cold season, they endured an entire age. For thousands of years, the Earth itself seemed to be holding its breath, wrapped in ice, locked in silence. Yet through all those dark, freezing centuries, humanity held on. It was not a single heroic act that saved them, no great war, no sudden miracle. It was patience, persistence, and the quiet determination to greet each sunrise, no matter how bitter the air felt. When we imagine history, we often think of it as loud, kings giving speeches, armies clashing, monuments rising. But this story is one of quiet endurance. It is the sound of flint striking flint as a spark is coaxed into life. It is the soft crunch of feet over snow as hunters follow a trail at dawn. It is the low murmur of voices telling stories around a fire while the wind howls outside. This is not the history of empires, it is the history of ordinary people simply choosing over and over not to give up. There is something deeply comforting about this. It reminds us that human strength is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simple. Sometimes it is just the decision to take one more step, to light one more fire, to share one last piece of food. These quiet choices kept entire generations alive. The people of that time may not have thought of themselves as heroes, but in their persistence they were building the foundation for all of us who came after. The lessons they left behind are still with us. We carry their adaptability in the way we invent new tools, the way we solve problems, the way we work together. The stone blades they made were the ancestors of every knife, every machine, every technology we use today. The shelters they built were the beginning of every house and city that would one day rise. The stories they told by firelight grew into myths, legends, and eventually into history itself. Even now, when we gather together on cold nights, sharing warmth and telling stories, we are doing something very old, something that began there, in the heart of the Ice Age. The retreat of the glaciers was not an ending so much as a beginning. As the world warmed, humans spread farther than ever before. They explored new valleys, crossed new rivers, followed the herds into new territories. Some of these journeys would take them to lands no human had ever seen. In this way, the challenge of the Ice Age became the seed of curiosity, the reason we kept walking, kept exploring, kept looking for what lay beyond the horizon. And yet, even as the Earth changed, the memory of the ice stayed with them. It shaped their beliefs, their fears, and their celebrations. The respect for fire, the reverence for animals, the need to plan for lean times, these were habits carved into humanity by the cold. They were reminders that nature is powerful, that life is fragile, but that together we can endure even the harshest trials. When we look back now, across tens of thousands of years, we can still feel a connection to these people. We can see them gathered close, furs wrapped around their shoulders, firelight flickering across their faces. We can almost hear their voices, low and steady, speaking of hunts and ancestors and the world beyond the stars. They are distant in time but not so different from us. Their fears were our fears, hunger, loss, the unknown. Their hopes were our hopes, warmth, safety, a better tomorrow for their children. Perhaps that is why this story feels so calm, so grounding. It tells us that hardship is not forever. The ice did not last. The earth turned, the seasons shifted, and warmth returned. Life found a way and humanity was ready to meet it. There is a kind of peace in knowing this, that even in the coldest, darkest age, the fire of life never went out. And tonight, as we finish this journey through the past, you might feel that same quiet fire. The world is still vast, still full of challenges, but the story of the Ice Age tells us that we are strong enough to face them. We have done it before. We can do it again. The courage that kept the fire burning in a frozen cave is the same courage that beats quietly in every human heart today. The embers of their fire glow softly in the mind's eye. The wind outside has grown gentle, the stars overhead are steady. Tomorrow will come just as it always did, and just as they always did, we will wake and take one more step forward. The long winter is over. The story is complete. And as the last flames fade to a warm glow, the camp grows quiet, the world grows still, and it is time to rest.